My name is Grace. I'm 29. Chicago's infamous gray clouds seemed to have gathered just for me today, pressing down with a weight that felt personal. I work as an accountant at a private medical clinic. I've always been good with numbers. Income, expenses, balance sheets. They all have a clear, definitive result. When you add 2 and 2, you get 4. No surprises. But the mathematics of life I've learned bears no resemblance to the calculations on paper, especially when you're burning with the desire to be a mother. My hands were trembling as I sat on that cold metallic chair in the hospital's waiting room. The sharp antiseptic smell filling my nostrils made me nauseous. A young woman was sitting next to me. In her arms, wrapped in a pink blanket, was a baby sleeping soundly. The woman gently stroked the baby's cheek, looking at it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. I looked away. In that moment, I would have given everything I owned to be in her place, to feel that exhaustion and sleeplessness. Anything as long as my arms weren't empty. I wanted the deafening silence of our home to be broken by the sound of a baby. I've been married to Mark for 4 years. Mark is a real estate agent, hard-working, a smooth talker liked by everyone. Or so I thought. We'd been trying for 2 years. The disappointment at the end of every month, the silent tears I shed in the bathroom with the faucet running so no one could hear. Mark always said, "We have time, Grace. Don't rush it." But I was tired of waiting. I was here today for a definitive answer. Mark wasn't with me. As he left the house this morning, he'd said, "I have a huge closing, honey. I can't miss this sale. You can handle it," and planted a hasty kiss on my cheek. This feeling of loneliness was like a heavy stone sitting in the middle of my chest. "Grace," the nurse called out. I flinched and stood up. My legs struggled to carry me as I walked toward Dr. Peterson's office. Dr. Peterson was an old family acquaintance. A kind, fatherly doctor, but when I opened the door and walked in, I didn't see his usual warm welcome. He was sitting at his desk. His glasses were perched on the tip of his nose as he stared at the files in front of him. The expression on his face when he saw me was less that of a doctor looking at a patient, and more that of a man burdened by guilt. "Sit down, my dear," he said. His voice was tense. I sat down, clutching my purse tightly on my lap. "How are the results, Dr. Peterson?" I asked. My voice came out weaker than I expected. "Is there any hope?" Dr. Peterson took a deep breath. He took off his glasses and placed them on the desk. He avoided my eyes, fixing his gaze on a painting on the wall. "Grace," he said slowly, "I've looked at your tests over and over. Your hormone levels, your ultrasound results. Medically, there is nothing preventing you from becoming a mother. Everything looks normal." A flicker of hope ignited within me. So I said excitedly, "There's no problem. We can keep trying." Dr. Peterson shook his head. His shoulders slumped. "The problem isn't with you, my dear. But sometimes, medicine can only solve problems in the body. It can't solve life's other equations." I didn't understand what he meant. "Is it Mark?" I asked. "Is there a problem with his tests?" But he always put off getting tested. He said there was no need. The doctor fell silent. He started fiddling with a pen on his desk. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. I could see the beads of sweat forming on Dr. Peterson's forehead. It was as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. He had the unease of a man trapped between his professional ethics and his conscience. Suddenly he pushed his chair back and stood up. "My throat is dry," he said. His voice trembled. "I'm going to get myself some water. I also need to give a file to the nurse. I'll be out for 2 minutes." He walked towards the door. He stopped when his hand was on the doorknob. He didn't turn to face me. He spoke with his back to me. "My computer screen is still on. Old age, I guess. Sometimes I forget to turn it off. You're an accountant. You're good at reading numbers lists. You might want to take a look at the screen until I get back." And he left. He closed the door softly behind him. I was alone in the room. My heart was pounding in my ears. What did that mean? Why did he leave me alone with his computer? Curiosity outweighed fear. I slowly got up from my seat. My legs were shaking, but an invisible force pulled me towards that desk. I walked around the desk. I stood in front of the black leather chair. The computer screen lit up my face with a bright light. The hospital's patient record system was open. My eyes scanned the lines, complex medical terms, dates, codes, and then I saw the name. The name written in the middle of the screen under the patient's name section nailed me to the spot. Chloe Miller. My breath caught in my throat. This name was not unfamiliar. This was the name of Mark's ex-fiancée, the one he told me had died in a horrific car crash 5 years ago. The woman whose memory made Mark melancholic on certain days of the year, the woman whose name he sometimes mumbled in his sleep, crying, "I couldn't protect her." But here she was, in a hospital record. The date was today's date. My eyes moved to the rest of the line, and in that moment the air was sucked out of the room. My lungs were empty. Status pregnancy follow-up 29th week. Spouse information Mark. His last name was the same as mine. My husband's last name. Contact Mark's cell phone number. I had to hold onto the desk to keep from collapsing. The world started spinning around me. A bitter taste rose from my stomach to my throat. Chloe Miller was alive. Chloe Miller was pregnant, and the baby's father was my husband, Mark. My brain refused to process this information. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "She's dead," Mark told me. He cried, "A lie. This is a mistake." I reached for the mouse. I thought it might be a case of mistaken identity, but I knew that contact number by heart. It was the number of the man who had kissed me this morning and left, saying, "I have a big closing." I looked at the details on the screen. Last appointment date yesterday. In the notes section, a short note from the doctor, father-to-be, wishes to be present for the birth. Fetal development is normal. While I was here in this cold room, devastated that my arms would remain empty, my husband was experiencing the excitement of a baby in the womb of the woman he told me was dead. Mark's busy work schedule, his out-of-town trips, his late-night meetings, they were all lies. The pillow I'd slept on for years, the table we shared, the dreams I'd built, they were all built on a massive lie. Tears started streaming down my face. But this time the tears weren't from sadness. This time it was pure rage. A rage that burned like fire. When I heard the doorknob turn, I quickly pulled back. I got back to my seat. Dr. Peterson came in. He didn't look at my face. He sat down. He turned off the computer screen. "The water cooler is broken," he said. His voice was still tense. Then he looked up at me. He saw the devastation in my eyes. He knew I understood. "Grace," he said, "sometimes life gives us tests we never expect. Tests harder than any lab results." I picked up my purse. I couldn't say a word. There was a huge lump in my throat. I felt like if I spoke, I would scream. I just nodded and left the office. When I stepped into the hallway, the mother with the pink blanketed baby was gone. The hospital now seemed colder, darker. I took out my phone. Our wedding photo was the screensaver. How happy we looked. How innocent I was. I wanted to crush that photo with my thumb, but I didn't. I took a deep breath. The air filling my lungs was sharp. Mark had deceived me. He had made a fool of me. While I thought I was grappling with the ghost of a dead past, I was actually living inside a living lie. But Grace wasn't finished. As I left that clinic walking down the stairs, the sound of things breaking inside me echoed. But with every shattered piece, a harder, sharper resolve took its place. I wasn't going to cry. At least not now. First, I needed to see the truth in all its nakedness. My steps quickened as I walked towards the parking lot. Where was she, this woman Mark said was dead? That baby. That belly. I opened my car door. I sat in the driver's seat. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman with the pure longing for a child in her eyes was gone. In her place was an angry woman preparing to rise from the ashes of betrayal. I turned the key. Along with the sound of the engine, I made my decision. I wasn't going home. I wasn't going to call Mark and demand an explanation. Not yet. First, I would find that woman, Chloe Miller, and I would see with my own eyes the second life my husband had built. This story wasn't going to end here. In fact, everything was just beginning. If you trust the person closest to you, listen carefully to what I experienced, because sometimes the truth can be more shocking than the most terrifying nightmare. After leaving the hospital, I drove aimlessly for a while on Chicago's gray asphalt, not knowing where I was going. I turned off the radio. I didn't want to hear any sound other than the monotonous hum of the engine. Only Mark's voice echoed in my mind. That trembling, pained, masterfully orchestrated voice. For 4 years, a full 4 years, I had lived in the shadow of a ghost that never actually existed. When I stopped at a red light, my gaze fell on the empty passenger seat. I remembered the moment Mark sat in that seat and told me about the night of the accident as if it were yesterday. It was a rainy evening. He had pulled the car over his head in his hands. "It was raining, Grace," he had said, his voice choked. "Just like tonight. Visibility was 0. By the time I saw the truck's headlights, it was too late. I swerved, but Chloe's scream is still in my ears. I couldn't get her out of the car. The flames, those flames burned my life too. That night I had held him, letting him cry on my chest. While stroking his hair, I thought to myself, what a loyal man, how he still loves the woman he lost. I had comforted my own husband while he mourned his ex-fiancée. How foolish I was. Those tears, those shivers, those detailed accounts, it was all an act. By the time I got home, it was getting dark. Our charming apartment in Lincoln Park looked like a fortress of peace from the outside. Geraniums on our balcony, lace curtains on our windows. Everything looked so normal, so perfect, that it made me sick. My hand trembled as I put the key in the lock. That familiar click no longer signaled the opening of my home's door, but the opening of a box of lies. I went inside. The house was quiet. Mark's beige trench coat hung on the coat rack. Next to it, my umbrella. They looked so compatible. Just like us. The couple, the neighbors called exemplary. Mark is such a gentleman, Grace is such a lady, they would say. No one knew about the coldness behind these walls, my longing for a child and Mark's fake mourning. I went into the living room. I threw my purse on the couch. I looked at the top shelf of the bookcase, the one Mark called Chloe's corner. A blurry black and white photo used to be there. The silhouette of a woman walking on a beach, her back turned. Mark had said, I can't bear to look at her face. This picture is enough. Now I understood. That photo was probably a random image downloaded from the internet. He couldn't put up a picture of Chloe's face because there was a chance we might run into her somewhere. Chicago was a big city, but not that big. I stood in front of the bookcase. My eyes were fixed on that photo. I remembered Mark's famous anniversary. Every year in November, on the date he claimed the accident happened, he would say, "Today is a very hard day for me, Grace. I can't breathe. I need to be alone and go to the cemetery and leave the house." Sometimes he wouldn't come back for a night. "I spent the night at her grave," he'd say. When he returned the next day with swollen eyes, I would make him hot soup and give him a blanket. It turned out those dates were his special days with Chloe. Maybe the day they met, maybe another important day for them. He wasn't spending the night at a cemetery. He was going to the other woman, to Chloe. My husband had used my compassion, my understanding, to camouflage the life he was leading with another woman. I went into the bedroom. Our bed was perfectly made. Mark liked order. He had compartmentalized his life just like that. In one drawer, there was me, the obedient, understanding, child-wanting wife. In the other drawer, there was Chloe, the passionate from the past, now pregnant other wife. And these drawers never mixed. I opened the drawer on the nightstand. Mark's watches, cufflinks, and in the very back that small, unlocked but always special-feeling wooden box. He always said he kept the only thing left of Chloe in it, a burnt necklace pendant. "This is the only thing I could find among the ashes," he had said, his eyes welling up. I picked up the box. I lifted the lid. Inside was a tarnished silver pendant, a butterfly. For years I had looked at this necklace and felt sorry for a woman who died young. But now looking closely, I saw the tiny stamp on the back of the pendant. A brand stamp. This brand belonged to a store that sold cheap costume jewelry, a store that had only become popular last year. It couldn't have come from a fire 5 years ago. This necklace wasn't old. The burn marks were likely a clumsy aging attempt hastily done with a lighter. I squeezed the metal in my hand. It warmed in my palm. This fake piece of evidence summarized Mark's entire fabrication. The pain he presented to me was nothing more than a cheap piece of metal bought at a mall kiosk with some marks scraped onto it. In that moment, every moment of our marriage flashed before my eyes. The shadow that fell over his face every time the topic of children came up, his words, "I can't go through the fear of loss again. What if something happens to our child?" It turned out his fear wasn't of loss. His fear was of not being able to manage 2 families at the same time. He was already going to have a child. Maybe Chloe's pregnancy was planned and Mark was playing the trauma card to suppress my desire for a child. I went into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror, my pale face, my sunken eyes. I was the one carrying the burden of this marriage. I was the one mourning, compromising, managing. But the person being mourned had never actually died. My eyes fell on Mark's toothbrush. The blue-handled brush, next to it mine pink. How innocent they looked. Side by side, I quickly reached out. I took Mark's toothbrush. I threw it into the trash can with a vengeance. This small, meaningless act gave me a strange sense of power. I would no longer play the victim in this house among these things in the shadow of these memories. I returned to the living room and sat on the couch. It was completely dark outside, but I didn't turn on the lights. Mark would be home soon. He would put on that tired, self-sacrificing husband mask again. "I'm so tired, Grace." "The market is so slow," he would say. Maybe he would come here after caressing the baby in Chloe's belly, with the scent of another home on him. I reached for my purse. I repeated the phone number I saw in Dr. Peterson's office in my mind. Mark didn't have a number saved as Chloe in his contacts, but I remembered that plumber Ken, the plumber whom he called frequently. His late-night trips to the balcony saying Ken's got another burst pipe on a job site. I took out my phone. I had to make a move that would confirm the suspicion in my mind, not just call Mark's number. But no, not now. I wanted to look at his face when he came home and see the ugliness beneath that mask. I heard a key in the lock. My heart started to pound against my ribcage. That familiar metallic sound was no longer the sound of a homecoming, but a declaration of war. I took a deep breath. I put on a fake expression just like Mark had done to me for years. But this time the expression wasn't compassion, but an icy calm. The door opened. The yellow light from the living room chandelier stabbed my eyes like a knife. Mark stood in the doorway, keys in hand. He had that familiar, tired but affectionate husband mask on his face. His lips moved, he said something, but my ears were ringing. A single image was stuck in my mind, as if it were seared onto my retina, the cold blue screen of the hospital computer. Patient name Chloe Miller, gestational week 29, spouse information Mark. These words spinning in my brain drowned out Mark's voice, asking, "Grace, are you okay, honey?" A profound shock numbed my entire body. I felt a tingling in my fingertips. The man in front of me was the man I had shared a pillow with for 4 years, whose scent I knew by heart, for whom I prepared breakfast every morning. But he was also the husband of a 7-month pregnant woman whose name was on that screen. Mark took off his shoes and walked towards me. Each step made a muffled sound on the carpet. When he sat down next to me, the couch cushions sank with his weight. That sinking felt like the collapse of my world. "You're as white as a sheet," he said, reaching to touch my forehead. "Are you sick?" I wanted to push his hand away to scream at the top of my lungs. I wanted to ask, "Do you have another wife?" to throw that truth in his face, but I couldn't. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth. Under the effect of shock, I just stared at him with empty eyes. My head was all I could manage. My voice came out raspy and weak. "It hurts a lot." The look of concern on Mark's face was so realistic that for a moment I doubted my own sanity. Did I see it wrong? Maybe it was a coincidence of names. But no. The phone number was there. That number was the number of the phone currently in Mark's pocket, and that spouse designation. This wasn't just an affair. This was a planned life, one that reeked of formality and seriousness. "Did you go to the doctor today?" Mark asked as he took off his jacket. His voice was casual, but I caught a split-second flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Without taking my eyes off him, I said I went. Mark paused. His hands unbuttoning his shirt hung in midair. "And?" he said, holding his breath. "What did Dr. Peterson say? Watching him like this made me sick." What he was curious about wasn't my health or whether we would have a child. He was curious about whether his secret was out. "Negative," I said in an icy voice. "It didn't happen again. We're not having a child." Mark's shoulders dropped. He let out the breath he was holding with a whoosh. He couldn't hide the expression of relief that spread across his face. "It's for the best, my love," he said, adding a fake sadness to his voice. "It just means it's not the time. We're enough for each other, right? We're enough for each other." Yet he had already hollowed out the concept of we and built another we. In that moment, the morning stories Mark had told for years played in my mind like a film strip. The trips to Chloe's grave, the depressions on the anniversaries of the accident, the sleep-talking at night, it was all a devilish fiction woven to hide that woman and their unborn child from me. Chloe hadn't died. Chloe was pregnant, and Mark was masterfully managing 2 parallel lives. I stood up, my legs trembling. Breathing in the same room with him was like inhaling a toxic gas. "I'm going to bed," I said. "Aren't you going to eat something? You must be hungry," he said from behind me. Without answering, I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I leaned my back against the door and sank to the floor. In the dark room, that screen appeared before my eyes again. Chloe Miller, 29 weeks, 7 months. For 7 months, while Mark was by my side playing the role of a husband yearning for a child, he was experiencing the excitement of fatherhood somewhere else. Maybe he was looking at ultrasound photos, painting a nursery, thinking of names. What was going through his mind as he watched my monthly disappointment, my tears? Did he feel sorry, or was he laughing inwardly? I covered my mouth. I suppressed a sob. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't shed a single tear for this man, for this lie. My shock was slowly giving way to a cold, sharp anger. I took out my phone. The screen's light hit my face. My trembling fingers opened the search engine. I typed that name, Chloe Miller. Thousands of results. But I was looking for the one living in Chicago. I remembered the neighborhood from that grocery store receipt I found in Mark's jacket. Pilsen. I opened the map. I looked at the streets around that store. Ordinary narrow streets, row houses. Chloe was somewhere there, a heavily pregnant woman waiting for her husband to come home from work. Did she know? Did she know Mark was married, or was she a victim like me? What had Mark told her? Had he said he was divorced? Or that he traveled a lot for work? I took my pillow and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at Mark's pillow. I thought about the schemes spinning inside the head of the man who slept on that pillow. How could he sleep? How could he carry 2 women, 2 lives, such massive lies? The doorknob slowly turned down. It wasn't locked, but Mark didn't come in. "Grace," he whispered from behind the door. "Do you need anything?" I didn't answer. I played dead, just like he had done with Chloe. "Good night," he said, and his footsteps receded. The sound of the TV in the living room came on. The routine continued, but for me, life had ended the moment I walked out of that hospital room. A completely different nightmare had begun. The word spouse on that screen was the death certificate of my marriage. I had to wait for morning. When the sun rose, I would go to the address on that grocery receipt. I would walk that neighborhood street by street. If necessary, I would go door to door. I would find Chloe Miller. I would see that belly with my own eyes. I wanted to see Mark's lies in the flesh standing right in front of me. Only then could I decide what to do. I lay down on the bed but didn't close my eyes. Watching the shadows on the ceiling, the naive, fragile woman inside me was slowly shedding her skin. I was now just a ruthless detective hungry for the truth, and I, not Mark, would write the end of this story. As the first light of morning filtered through the sheer curtains of our bedroom, Mark was in a deep sleep beside me. His chest rose and fell in regular intervals. He slept with that innocent, clueless expression on his face. This sight, which once brought me peace, now made me sick to my stomach. I slowly got out of bed. Every movement was calculated. I walked on my tiptoes so the bed springs wouldn't creak, so the hardwood floor wouldn't make a sound. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My under eyes were dark from lack of sleep, but my gaze had a strange, icy clarity. That was no longer the crying, sad Grace. It was a hunter. I put on simple, inconspicuous clothes. Black slacks, a white blouse, and I pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail. I put my notebook, a pen, and the horn-rimmed glasses I sometimes used at work into my purse. Mark was still sleeping when I left the house. On the kitchen table, I left a note that read, "Had to leave early. Work is crazy." This was the first lie I told him, and it wouldn't be the last. When I got into the car, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I entered the address from the grocery receipt into the GPS. The road to Pilsen was jammed with morning traffic. Every time I stopped, I played out scenarios in my mind. What if she's not home? What if Mark is there? When I arrived in Pilsen, I was met with a world very different from the Lincoln Park I lived in. Steep streets, row houses leaning against each other, children running around. It was noisier, more complex, but more alive. I parked the car a little way down from the store. This was the place on the receipt, La Esperanza Market. It was a small neighborhood bodega. I went inside. The sharp smell of aged cheese and fresh bread filled my nose. Behind the counter, a middle-aged, pot-bellied man was reading a newspaper. I bought a bottle of water. I went to the counter. My heart was in my throat, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Have a good one," I said, handing him the money. "I'm looking for an acquaintance around here. Maybe you know him. Mark, the real estate agent." The man paused as he put the money in the register. He looked at me over his glasses. "Which Mark? You mean Mark from the yellow building?" "Yes," I said, taking a wild guess. "His wife is pregnant, I believe." The man's face lit up. "Oh, Mark, sure I know him. Chloe's husband. They live in that yellow apartment building across the street. 3rd floor." He pointed to the building across the street, its old paint peeling. Then he lowered his voice and leaned over the counter as if sharing a secret. "He's a real gentleman. The poor guy has been through a lot." I frowned. "Oh, why is that?" The store owner shook his head. His ex-wife gave him hell lady. The woman made his life a living nightmare. He went through the ringer to get that divorce. Good thing he's happy now with Chloe. They've got a baby on the way. They're very happy." Hearing this, my knees went weak. I had to hold onto the counter. So that was the story. I wasn't dead. I was the evil ex-wife who made his life a living hell, the one he had to fight to divorce. Mark hadn't just hidden Chloe from me. He had portrayed me as a monster to Chloe. In my own husband's story, I was the villain. "Thank you," I managed to say. I took the water and forced myself outside. I breathed in the fresh air, but my anger didn't subside. On the contrary, it grew like a raging fire. I looked at the yellow building. There was laundry hanging on the third-floor balcony. Baby clothes, tiny onesies, socks swaying in the wind. Just then, the balcony door opened and a woman came out. Chloe, the woman from the pictures Mark kept hidden. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore a loose maternity dress. Her belly was quite prominent. She placed a hand on her lower back and bent down with difficulty. She picked up a piece of clothing from the basket and hung it on the line. She had a tired but peaceful expression on her face. Seeing her in the flesh hit me with the full force of reality. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a rival. She was another deceived woman. I went back to the car. What was I going to do now? If I went to her door and yelled, "I'm this man's wife," what would happen? She was pregnant. She could faint, something could happen to the baby. Mark would use that, make me the guilty one. No, I had to be smarter. I had to get inside that house. I had to touch that life to see Mark's lies with my own eyes. My eyes fell on my work bag in the back seat. Inside were our company's promotional brochures and survey forms. An idea came to mind and a bitter smile formed on my lips. I took out my horn-rimmed glasses from my purse and put them on. I took my notebook in hand. From a nearby baby store, I bought a soft, textured baby blanket I saw in the window. I had it gift-wrapped. I was no longer Grace. I was a market researcher for a baby products company. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. I walked towards the yellow building's door. The apartment building smelled of dampness and fried oil. As I climbed the stairs, my heart beat a little faster with each step. First floor, second floor, and third floor. I stood in front of the brown steel door. On the doormat it said, "Welcome." What a great irony. I rang the bell. I heard the sound of slippers from inside. Someone looked through the peephole. Then I heard the lock turn. The door opened slowly. Chloe was in front of me. She looked younger, more innocent, up close. Her eyes were puffy, but her gaze was soft. She was surprised to see me. "Yes," she said politely. I cleared my throat. I gave my voice its most professional tone. "Hello," I said, smiling. "Sorry to bother you. I'm from a baby products company. We're conducting market research for expectant mothers in your area. We have small gifts for participants." I held up the gift-wrapped package slightly. The suspicion on Chloe's face instantly vanished. It was replaced by an excited smile. Her hand involuntarily went to her belly. "Oh, really?" she said. "How nice of you. We just have a few questions." "You can answer them at the door," I said, actually, hoping to be invited in. Chloe opened the door all the way. "Oh no, don't be silly. Please come in. I was just making myself some herbal tea. I was about to start talking to the walls from loneliness. My husband's at work." She stepped back to let me pass. The phrase, "my husband's at work," hit me like a punch to the stomach. My husband was also her husband. As I crossed the threshold, my heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. I was stepping into my husband's other home, his forbidden kingdom. As I took off my shoes, I saw that familiar beige trench coat hanging on the coat rack. Mark's trench coat identical to the one in my home. So he had bought two, one there, one here. This detail proved once again how diabolical the plan was. "Welcome. My name is Chloe," the woman said, extending her hand. I shook her hand. Her hand was warm and soft. "Pleased to meet you," I said, looking into her eyes. The lie slipped from my lips without my voice trembling. "I'm Emily." "Please come into the living room," Chloe said, pointing to the bright room at the end of the hallway. When I took off my shoes and stepped inside, even the softness of the carpet under my feet reminded me of my own home. But the similarity wasn't limited to the flooring. The layout of the living room, the placement of the furniture, even the angle of the television reflected Mark's meticulous taste. This wasn't some cheap mistress's apartment. This was my husband's other home. My eyes involuntarily scanned the walls, the shelves, and then I saw the picture frames on the television stand. My breath caught in my throat. In the front frame, Mark and Chloe were smiling, their heads close together. Behind them was a bright blue sea. Mark was wearing the blue linen shirt I had packed in his suitcase last summer when he said he had a sales conference in Miami. He looked so happy, so peaceful in the photo, that there was no trace of the mournful man living in the shadow of a dark past that he pretended to be with me. The light in his eyes was genuine. "You and your husband make a lovely couple," I said, surprised that my voice didn't tremble, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You look very happy." Chloe smiled. She looked at the photo, her hand on her belly. "Thank you. We took that on our honeymoon. Mark doesn't usually like having his picture taken, but he made an exception for me that day. Honeymoon, my knees gave out. I had to sink into the nearest armchair. When we got married, Mark had said, 'Work is crazy, Grace. We can't go on a vacation right now. We have debts. We'll make up for it later.' That later never came. It turned out he had used that vacation time, that budget, that time here with this woman." Chloe went to the kitchen. "Let me get you that herbal tea. My husband loves it too. We drink it together in the evenings." While she was in the kitchen, I continued to scan the room like a detective examining a crime scene. A book on the coffee table caught my attention. I opened the cover. On the first page, a handwritten note, "To my darling husband, my hero, Mark. Love, Chloe." I put the book back. My fingers felt like they were burning. Then my eyes caught the gray cardigan thrown over the armchair. I recognized that cardigan. I had bought it for Mark as a gift 2 years ago. A week later, he had complained, "I think I left it at the office. I can't find it. I wonder if the cleaning crew took it." The cardigan I thought was lost was now on another woman's armchair, infused with her scent. Chloe came in with a tray. The clinking of the glasses broke the silence. She placed the tea in front of me and sat down in the armchair opposite me, next to that gray cardigan. "What does your husband do?" I asked, taking out my notebook and pretending to write, not taking my eyes off her face. "He's a real estate agent," she said with pride. "He works so hard. Day and night, he's always running around. Sometimes he has out-of-town closings. He's gone for days, but it's okay. He's doing it for us. For our baby's future." The days Mark told me were business trips were spent here. The evenings he told me he was working late, he was drinking tea with Chloe on this couch. "Isn't it hard?" I asked, pressing my pen to the notebook. "Being alone during pregnancy." Chloe sighed deeply. A sad shadow fell over her face. "Of course it's hard, but I have to support Mark. I want him to find peace after the nightmare he went through with his ex-wife." The pen froze in my hand. "His ex-wife," yes, Chloe said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "She wore him down. She had psychological problems. She became obsessed with Mark. Their divorce was very difficult. The woman constantly caused problems, made threats. Mark is still afraid sometimes that she'll show up. That's why we keep our address and everything private." My blood ran cold. I was listening to a story written by my own husband, one that turned me into a monster, an obsessive maniac. While I was trying to be his partner, his confidant, he had cast me as the villain. He had not only cheated on me, he had distorted my identity, my honor, my very existence, and used it as a shield for himself. "I see" was all I could say. My voice was icy, but Chloe attributed it to my professionalism. "So how are the nursery preparations going? Part of our research is about nursery preferences." "Oh, of course, that's my favorite room," Chloe said, her face lighting up again. She stood up with difficulty. "Come, I'll show you." We went into the room at the end of the hallway. When the door opened, the smell of fresh paint and new furniture hit my face. The room looked like it was straight out of a magazine cover. The walls were painted a pale blue. A white wooden crib stood by the window. A mobile with tiny clouds and stars hung above it. But the detail that truly broke me was the rocking chair in the corner. I knew that chair. Last month I had seen a large charge on Mark's credit card statement. When I asked, he had said, "We bought new waiting chairs for the office." For the client's comfort, that chair wasn't for the office. It was for Chloe to be comfortable while she nursed her baby. I approached the crib. Inside, a neatly folded blanket lay. Chloe came up beside me. She placed her hand on the edge of the crib. "His daddy put the crib together," she said, smiling. "He spent hours on it. If even one screw was missing, he'd turn the world upside down. He wants everything to be perfect for his son. The man who would tell me it's not meant to be after a doctor's appointment, the man who was too helpless to change a light bulb at home, had become a master carpenter here. For his son?" The closet door was slightly ajar. My eyes drifted there. Inside, tiny onesies and sleepers were lined up on hangers, and on the bottom shelf of the closet sat a pair of adult men's slippers. The same ones Mark wore at home, navy blue plaid pattern. In that moment, the scale of the betrayal went beyond emotional. This was a systematic, planned operation. To keep his 2 lives from mixing, Mark had bought 2 of everything: 2 trench coats, 2 pairs of slippers, 2 lives. He wasn't a guest in this house. He wasn't a fugitive here. This was his home. Chloe was his wife. The baby was his son. And me, I was just the other woman he visited in the evenings, the one he put to sleep with lies. I looked at the wooden letters hanging on the wall above the bed. L-E-O. The baby's name would be Leo. He had stolen our hopes and given them to this room, to this baby. Could I have some water? I asked. I had no strength left to stand. The nausea in my stomach had become unbearable. I'll get it right away, Chloe said and left the room. I was alone in the nursery. Standing by the crib Mark built next to the chair he bought. Mark's presence in this room was so palpable it felt like he was standing behind me, breathing. This man wasn't just a liar. He was an emotional thief. He had stolen my years, my youth, my dreams of motherhood, and invested them in this house. When Chloe returned with a glass of water, I tried to compose my face. I drank the water in one gulp. "Thank you so much," I said. As I placed the glass on the table, I should get going. "You've been very helpful." "I'll see you again," Chloe said with sincerity, walking me to the door. "Come back after the birth. You can meet baby Leo." This invitation was the final blow to my heart. As I left, I gave one last look at that beige trench coat in the entryway. That trench coat was the skin of the man in my home, but the man inside was a stranger. When I got out of the building, my legs could barely carry me. When I got in the car and closed the door, I collapsed onto the steering wheel, but I didn't cry. My tears were spent. In their place, a cold, razor-sharp decision had settled. Mark would come home tonight. He would wear that tired mask again. But this time, he wouldn't find the believing, loving Grace. This time, there would be a woman who knew about the crib he built, the lies he told, and the hope he was waiting for. And that woman had sworn to end this game. The 3 days that followed were the longest, most silent 3 days of my life. In that house, in the rooms where Mark breathed, breathing the same air as him, felt like inhaling shards of glass. Every time I looked at his face, every time he called me darling, every time he stroked my hair, my stomach churned and I had to fight the urge to vomit. It was time to bring the curtain down on this play. The morning after Mark left for work, I got ready. This time, I wasn't wearing the simple clothes of the researcher Emily. I wore my own clothes, Grace's armor. I put only one thing in my purse, our red-covered, gold-embossed marriage certificate. When I arrived in Pilsen, the sky was gray. The weight of an impending rain hung over the city. I stood in front of the yellow building. I got out of the car. My steps this time were not shaky, but firm and determined. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I climbed the stairs, but this was not from fear, but from the weight of the truth. I rang the bell. When the door opened, Chloe was there. She was wearing that loose dress again. Her hair was in a messy bun. A look of genuine surprise appeared on her face when she saw me. "Oh, Emily," she said, smiling. "Did you forget something, or is there more to the survey?" I looked into her eyes, those brown, trusting eyes. For a moment, the rage inside me battled with compassion, but there was no time to lose. This lie could not go on any longer. "Can I come in, Chloe?" I asked. The coldness in my voice froze the smile on her face. "Of course. Please," she said, stepping aside. We went to the living room. I sat on that familiar couch where Mark's cardigan lay. Chloe sat across from me. She clasped her hands over her belly. She was getting restless. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Is it something with the company?" I opened my purse. I took out the red certificate and placed it on the coffee table right in front of her. "My name isn't Emily," I said, not taking my eyes off her. "My name is Grace." Chloe's brow furrowed. She weighed the name in her mind. Then her pupils dilated. The color drained from her face. "Grace," she whispered. "Mark's obsessive ex-wife Grace, not ex," I said in an icy voice. "I am still Mark's wife, right now." "For the past 4 years, Chloe recoiled. She covered her mouth with her hand. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's impossible," Mark told me. "You got divorced. You're sick. You're stalking him. So you came all this way. How did you find my home?" Mark's poison had seeped so deep. He had turned me into a stalker, and Chloe believed it with all her heart. I took out my phone. I opened the gallery. I found the photo we had taken at Mark's cousin's wedding last week. I showed her the date at the bottom of the photo. "Look," I said, holding the phone close to her face. "Look at the date, Chloe. This photo was taken last week. Look at the suit Mark is wearing. The watch on his wrist. The woman next to him is me. We are not divorced. We never separated. Every night Mark leaves that life and comes home to me, to our home in Lincoln Park. Chloe looked at the photo. She squinted. She examined Mark's clothes, my dress, the way we were embracing. Then her gaze shifted to the red certificate on the table. With a trembling hand, she reached out. She took the certificate, opened it. She saw our names, the date, and most importantly, she saw that there was no record of a divorce. She flipped through the pages. They were blank. The silence in the room was broken by the sound of raindrops hitting the window as the rain started outside. Chloe didn't scream. She didn't attack me. She just froze. The blood had completely drained from her face. Her lips started to turn purple. The certificate in her hand fell into her lap. "He promised me," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes were fixed on a point in the distance on that happy honeymoon photo on the wall. "He said that woman was a nightmare from my past. He swore on our baby." Tears started to stream down her face, but silently. There were no sobs. Just a moment of pure, devastating realization. I was watching a person's life being shaken to its core, everything she believed in turning to dust in an instant. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice was hoarse. "You had a right to know. You had a right to know who your child's father is, what kind of man he is." Chloe didn't answer. Suddenly, her face contorted. She clutched her stomach. Her breath hitched. "Chloe," I said with concern, trying to get up. A sharp, muffled groan escaped her lips. She doubled over. Her hands gripped her belly tighter. Her fingers clutched the fabric as if to tear it. Something is happening. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She was as white as a sheet. "I'm having contractions," she said through gritted teeth. "It's bad. Like a knife." I rushed to her side. I took her arm. "Okay, calm down. Take a deep breath." But she couldn't calm down. Her body couldn't handle the blow her soul had taken. The stress, the grief, and the shock had triggered her body. "Water," she moaned. Her eyes widened in terror. My water broke. I looked down. I saw the wetness seeping from the side of the armchair where the gray cardigan was onto the carpet. Her water had broken. She was only 7 months along, 29 weeks. It was too early. No, not now," Chloe stammered, her voice rising in panic. "He's too small. He won't survive. Grace, help me." The woman she had just called an obsessive ex-wife, the woman she feared, was now desperately begging for her help. In that second, we both forgot our roles. In that moment, I was neither the cheated wife nor the rival to the mistress. I was just a person who had to help a mother in distress. "Don't be afraid," I said, trying to keep my voice strong, though I was trembling inside. "I'm calling an ambulance. We're going to the hospital right away. Nothing will happen to the baby." Chloe collapsed onto the couch. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. Her eyes were rolling back. I squeezed her ice-cold hand with mine. "Don't leave me," she said in a weak voice, her nails digging into my palm. "Don't call Mark. Don't you dare call him. Just you. You stay." When I heard Mark's name, the anger inside me flared up again, but I quickly suppressed it. Now was not the time. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." When the sound of the ambulance siren was heard at the end of the street, Chloe was on the verge of losing consciousness. The world of lies Mark had built was now collapsing in this living room amidst labor pains, the sound of rain and sirens, and whether we would get out from under this rubble and, most importantly, the fate of that innocent baby Leo would be decided in the coming hours. Inside the narrow, bumpy cabin of the ambulance, the sound of the siren echoed in my brain. Chloe lay on the stretcher, digging her nails into my palm with every contraction. Her face was slick with sweat. Her eyes were wide with fear. In that moment, the complex, dirty bond between us was erased. She was not the other woman, and I was not the cheated wife. We were just a person in pain and someone else holding her hand. "Hang in there, Chloe," I said, trying to make my voice heard over the wail of the sirens. "We're almost there. We're almost at the hospital." Chloe shook her head. Her lips trembled. "It's too early," she moaned. "If something happens to him, I can't live, Grace. If something happens to my son, her son, Mark's son, the son I could never have, the son I dreamed of and cried for." How cruel was the reality life had laid before me. I was helping my husband's child to be born. But when I saw the pure terror in Chloe's eyes, the jealousy inside me gave way to a strange, heavy sense of responsibility. I couldn't let this woman and the innocent life in her womb pay the price for Mark's sins. The ambulance stopped at the hospital's emergency entrance. The doors opened. Cold air and the smell of the hospital filled the cabin. The paramedics quickly lowered the stretcher. I was breathless trying to keep up with them. As we entered through the automatic doors, a nurse stopped us. She had a form in her hand. "Are you family?" she asked quickly. I hesitated. Who was I? His wife's wife, the other wife of the man who deceived her, or the person who delivered the news that destroyed her life? Chloe reached out her hand to me from the stretcher. There was a pleading look in her eyes. She was terrified of being alone, of going into labor alone in this cold place. "I'm her sister," I said. The lie. It had become the easiest thing to come from my lips these days. "I'm her sister. I'm staying with her." The nurse nodded. "We're taking her to the OR right away. High risk of premature birth. The baby is in distress. Wait here." They wheeled Chloe through the double doors at the end of the hallway. When the doors closed in my face, I was left standing there. White tiles, bright lights, people rushing around. Everything was a blur. I sank into one of the waiting room chairs. I looked at my hands. Chloe's nail marks had formed red crescents in my palm. My clothes had her sweat, maybe her tears on them. The minutes passed like hours. I started pacing the hallway. I thought of Mark. He was probably sitting in his office right now, drinking his coffee, planning which house to go to tonight. Maybe he had called, Chloe couldn't reach her and thought she must be sleeping. The fake order he had created was on its last legs here in this sterile corridor. About an hour later, the door opened and a doctor in green scrubs came out. When he lowered his mask, his face had a tired expression. "Chloe Miller's family," I immediately jumped up. "That's me. How is she?" "The mother is fine," the doctor said. "It was a difficult birth, but we got the bleeding under control. She's resting now." "And the baby?" I asked, my heart in my throat. The doctor took a deep breath. "The baby was born at 29 weeks. His lungs are not fully developed yet. He's having respiratory distress. We took him to the NICU immediately. We put him in an incubator. His condition is critical, but not hopeless. He's a fighter, not a coward like his father. A fighter. Can I see him?" "Only from behind the glass," the doctor said. "The neonatal intensive care unit is at the end of the hall." I walked to where the doctor directed. When I reached the glass partition, I was met with the scene inside. Rows of incubators, flashing monitors, thin tubes, and there in the incubator in the far corner lay a baby the size of my palm. Mark's son, Leo. He was so small that his skin seemed transparent. His veins were visible. The wires attached to his chest, the tubes in his nose wrapped his tiny body. He trembled like a baby bird. I pressed my hand against the glass. The glass was cold, but my fingertips were burning. I expected to see Mark when I looked at him. I expected to see the face of the man I hated his betrayal. But all I saw was an innocent life clinging to life. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't this baby's fault that his father was a liar, that his mother was deceived, that my heart was broken. A single tear rolled down my cheek and hit the glass. This was not a tear I shed for myself. It was for the vulnerability behind that glass. "Welcome," I whispered towards the glass. "Welcome, little stranger." Just then, I heard the sound of a wheelchair behind me. I turned. A nurse was bringing Chloe. Chloe looked exhausted. Her face was as white as paper, but her eyes were open. When she saw me, she had the nurse stop the chair. Her eyes immediately went to the glass, to that small incubator. The moment she saw her baby, her shoulders began to shake. She covered her mouth with her hand. A muffled sob escaped her lips. "He's so small," she whispered. "Grace, he's so small." I went to her. I knelt by the side of the chair. I took her hand. "He's alive, Chloe," I said, looking into her eyes. "The doctor said he's a fighter. He's holding on." Chloe turned her gaze from the baby to me. Her eyes held a mixture of gratitude and shame. "Why didn't you leave?" she asked. "Why are you still here? I'm your husband's." She couldn't complete the sentence. "Stop," I said firmly but gently. "We can't change what happened. You were a victim. So was I. But the one in there." I turned my head towards the baby. "He needs us. That's all that matters right now." Chloe nodded. She held my hand tighter. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "If Mark comes—" "He will come," I said, the icy tone in my voice making Chloe shiver. "But when he does, he won't find two weak women. For that baby to live, those lies have to die. And we will settle this account." I stood up. I gave one last look at the baby behind the glass. The broken pieces of Grace inside me had come together and stood up again. I had to be strong now, not just for my own pain, but for the breath behind this glass. When Mark stepped into this hospital, he would face the biggest shock of his life. because we had emerged from the wreckage he created holding on to each other. The buzzing of the white fluorescent lights in the hallway vibrated my frayed nerves like a violin bow. Chloe sat in the wheelchair, wrapped in a hospital blanket I had draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were swollen, her gaze fixed on a single point, the frosted glass of the newborn unit. I was in the shadow behind a pillar. My back was against the cold wall, my arms crossed over my chest. I was waiting with a hunter's patience for my prey to walk into the trap. The phone in Chloe's lap vibrated. It was on silent, but even the sound of the vibration echoed in the hallway. The screen's light illuminated Chloe's pale face. "He's calling," she whispered. "Answer it," I said in a calm voice. "Just tell him you're at the hospital. Tell him the floor and hang up. Don't let on that I'm here." With a trembling finger, Chloe touched the screen. She put the phone to her ear. "Hello, Mark." Her voice was raspy. She didn't have to act. Her pain was raw on her lips. "We're at the hospital." My water broke. "Yes. He was born. He's so small. Please come." She hung up. She looked at me. Fear and anger were mixed in her eyes. "He's coming," she said. He sounded so panicked. "His panic isn't for us, Chloe," I said, walking over and placing a hand on her shoulder. "His panic is for the order he created being disrupted. But don't worry, we're about to demolish that order." The minutes dragged on. We flinched at every ding of the elevators at the end of the hallway. Nurses, cleaning staff passed by, and then I heard those familiar footsteps. Fast hurried the solid, rhythmic sound of leather shoes on the marble floor. Mark appeared around the corner. He was wearing the navy blue suit he had worn when he left the house this morning, but his tie was loosened, the collar of his shirt open, his forehead was covered in sweat. He was running towards us out of breath. His eyes were focused only on Chloe in the wheelchair. He hadn't seen me yet, because I was standing in the shadow of the pillar behind Chloe. "Chloe!" he shouted, his voice echoing down the hall. "Honey, are you okay? Our son, how's our son?" He knelt beside Chloe. He took her hands. He started kissing them. "Damn it. I didn't hear my phone. I was in a meeting. I was so scared, Chloe. I thought something happened to you." Chloe didn't pull her hands away, but she didn't respond either. She just stared at her husband's face with icy eyes. Mark attributed this lack of response to shock. "Okay, beautiful. It's over," he said, placing his hand on Chloe's cheek. "I'm here now. Daddy's here. Everything will be okay." It was then that I stepped out of the shadow. "Will it be okay?" I said. My voice echoed in the hallway. Mark's hand froze on Chloe's cheek, his shoulders tensed. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head and saw me. It's hard to find words to describe the expression on his face. Horror, denial, panic. They all exploded in his eyes at the same time. His face turned a grayish color. It was as if he had seen not his wife, but an unexpected truth. "Gee, Grace," he stammered. He lost his balance as he stood up. He staggered. What are you doing here?" His gaze shifted from me to Chloe, then back to me. I could almost hear the grinding of the gears in his brain. Two separate planets, two separate lies had just collided in this hospital corridor. "Let me introduce you," I said, gesturing towards Chloe. "This is Chloe, your fiancée, who died 5 years ago. And this," I said, pointing to myself, "is Grace, your obsessive, mentally unstable ex-wife." Mark took a step back. His hands started to tremble. "You've misunderstood," he said, his voice choked. He was still trying to lie. This man had lies, not blood flowing through his veins. "I can explain." "Grace, look, it's not what you think." "What are you going to explain?" Chloe suddenly shouted. Her voice was so strong that even I was surprised. "That your son is fighting for his life in an incubator, or that you made a fool of 2 women at the same time." Mark looked around like a cornered rat. He saw the exit door at the other end of the hallway. The fatherly expression on his face disappeared. It was replaced by a cowardly urge to escape. I need some air," he said, and suddenly turned around. He was running away. Instead of confronting, of being held accountable, he chose to turn his back and leave, as always. But it wouldn't be so easy this time. "Security!" I yelled with all my might. "Stop that man!" Mark started running. His leather shoes slipped on the tiles. The 2 burly security guards at the end of the hallway heard my voice and moved. As Mark ran towards them, he tried to change direction in a panic, but it was useless. One of the guards blocked his path, the other grabbed his arm. "Let me go," Mark shouted, struggling. "I didn't do anything. My wife just gave birth. I'm stressed. Let me go." I quickly walked over to them. Chloe followed behind me, pushing her wheelchair. "Don't let him go," I told the security guard. "This man is my husband, and also this lady's husband." The security guard looked at Mark, then at us in astonishment. He held Mark's arm tighter. Mark turned to me. His eyes no longer had the mask of love or affection. There was pure hatred. "What do you think you're doing, Grace?" he hissed. "You've ruined everything. My job, my life, everything." "You ruined your own life, Mark," I said, getting close to his face. "We're just cleaning up the wreckage." Just then, the phone in Mark's pocket started ringing. It rang insistently without stopping. Mark made a move for his pocket, but the guard didn't let him. "Answer that phone," I said. When Mark resisted, the security guard took the phone out of his pocket. An unknown number was on the screen, but Mark turned even paler when he saw the number. "Don't answer," he said in a pleading voice. "Please don't answer." "Why?" I asked. "Is it your creditors or another woman you've deceived?" The security guard handed me the phone. I pressed the green button and put it on speaker. "Marky boy," said a rough, gravelly male voice. "Time's up. You bring that money today, you hear? You bring it or we'll bring both of your houses down on your head. Got it, we don't care about no baby." I hung up. Mark hung his head. So it wasn't just an emotional fraud. There was gambling debt, and who knows what else involved. The picture of the successful real estate agent he presented to us was also a lie. The big closings he boasted about were probably the rare bets he won. The times he said business was slow were the times he lost. Chloe came up beside me. She had wiped the tears from her eyes. She looked at Mark. Her gaze was no longer one of love but of disgust. "You will not see my son," she said in an icy voice. "I won't even let you look at his incubator. You don't deserve to be a father. You don't even deserve to be human." Mark lifted his head. "Chloe, don't. I had debts. I had to provide for you." "Lies," I shouted. "You're still lying. You did it not to provide for us, but to satisfy your own sick ego. Managing 2 lives gave you power, didn't it? It made you feel important." I turned to the security guards. "Call the police," I said. "We're filing a complaint against this man. Fraud, forgery, whatever you can find." Mark stopped struggling. His shoulders slumped. He knew it was over. The web of lies he had woven for years had finally tangled around his own feet. People had started to gather in the hallway. Whispers, disapproving looks. Mark was watching his precious reputation being trampled underfoot. But I didn't care. I took Chloe's wheelchair and turned her back towards where her baby was, towards that clean space. "Let's go, Chloe," I said. "There's nothing left to see here. We have a Leo to take care of." We turned our backs. Leaving Mark's pleas, the sounds of the guards' radios behind us, we walked towards the quiet, sacred light of the intensive care unit. The emptiness I felt watching Mark being escorted out of the hospital by the police gave way to an icy reality the next morning. I woke up before the sun. The pillow next to me was empty, but the silence in the house was filled with the noise of the wreckage Mark had left behind. It was no longer time to cry. As an accountant, I knew how to manage crises. I had to put my emotions aside and focus on the cold, ruthless world of numbers. My first stop was the bank. The branch manager, the same smiling man who had served us coffee for years, asking, "How are you, Grace?" How's Mark averted his eyes when he saw me. I sat at his desk. I clasped my hands on the table. "I want to see our accounts," I said. "All of them. Joint accounts, Mark's personal accounts, credit cards, everything." The manager took a deep breath, loosened his tie, and typed something on his keyboard. The sound of the printer in the silent room was like a buzzsaw. When he placed the papers in front of me, the sight made me sick. The accounts were empty. The savings I had set aside for our future, the investment account, even my 401k, it had all vanished. But the real disaster was in the credit card statements. Pages and pages of charges online, betting international transfers, cash advances. Mark wasn't just managing 2 women. Mark was drowning in a massive gambling addiction. The big real estate sales he boasted about were actually his rare wins. The times he said business was slow were the times he lost. "Grace," the manager said, his voice trembling, "there's something else." "Our house," I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What about our house? It's mortgaged." "Mark took out a loan 6 months ago using a power of attorney. The payments haven't been made for 3 months. The bank is about to start foreclosure proceedings." My head spun. He had forged my signature. He had sold my house, my security, my life without my knowledge. That house was my safe space. Now it was slipping through my fingers, too. I left the bank and went straight to the courthouse to my lawyer, Mr. Davies' office. When Mr. Davies reviewed the file, he couldn't hide his surprise. "Grace," he said, closing the file, "the man you're dealing with isn't just an unfaithful husband. This man is a professional con artist. forgery, bank fraud, embezzlement, and the fraudulent marriage proceedings with Miss Miller are a separate crime. My hand didn't shake as I signed the divorce petition. The signature I put on that paper was the death certificate of a 4-year lie. "We'll get an immediate injunction," the lawyer said. "His assets will be frozen." But from the looks of it, there are no assets left to freeze, only debts. In the late afternoon when I returned home, 2 strange men were waiting in front of the door. They weren't in suits. They were men in leather jackets with hard stares. They blocked my way when they saw me. "Where's Mark, sister?" one of them asked. His voice was threatening. It sounded like the voice I heard on the phone at the hospital. "I don't know," I said without looking away. "And I'm not your sister. I have no connection to that man anymore. Whatever he owes you, go ask him for it." The man laughed. It was an unnerving laugh. "Oh, we'll ask him all right, but the bird has flown. His phones are off, his office is empty. Tell him he can't escape by running. We'll get that money out of him one way or another." After the men left, I turned the key with trembling hands and entered the house. Mark had fled. After the police took his statement at the hospital, he had been released pending trial. But Mark was not a brave enough man to wait for a trial. With the loan sharks breathing down his neck, he had disappeared without looking back. I entered the house. The peaceful home now felt like a crime scene. I went into Mark's study. The drawers, the closets were ransacked. I looked for his passport. It was gone. He had taken a few pieces of clothing, stuffed his valuable watches if he hadn't sold them into a bag, and left. I sat on the floor and looked around. Mark had left Chloe and me under a massive pile of debt. While Chloe was fighting for her life with a premature baby in the hospital, I was here waiting for the foreclosure agents. My phone rang. It was Chloe. "Grace," she said. Her voice was weak, hoarse from crying. "The police came. They're asking about Mark. There's a warrant out for his arrest, but they can't find him." "I know," I said. "He ran Chloe. He sold us out. He dumped his debts on us and ran." There was a deep silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard Chloe's shaky breath. "Leo," she said, "my son's expenses, the incubator fees, Mark didn't pay. The hospital's billing department just came. Mark's private insurance was canceled due to non-payment. They're going to kick us out, Grace." This was the real Mark. He had sunk so low as to leave his own son, that little fighter, to deal with hospital bills. While his son fought for his life, he was probably on a bus heading for the border. "Don't worry," I said. The determination in my voice surprised even me. "I'll pay that money." "How?" Chloe asked. "He's wiped you out too." "I'll find a way," I said. "I'll sell my car if I have to. I'll sell the furniture in this house if I have to. But that baby will come out of that incubator healthy. Mark's filth will not touch that child." I hung up. I stood up. I went to the living room. I looked at our wedding photo on the wall. I looked at the man in that photo, at that lying smile one last time. I took the frame down from the wall. I put it on the floor. I stepped on it with my foot. The sound of breaking glass tore through the silence of the house. The face in the photo was shattered. Mark may have gone. He may have disappeared. But I was here, and I wasn't going anywhere until I cleaned up this mess, until I saved that baby. The divorce was just a piece of paper now. The real case was the case for survival. And I had no intention of losing. My hand didn't shake when the notary pushed the car's bill of sale in front of me. That red car, the one Mark bought saying it looks great on you, but whose loan payments I was actually making, I sold it to a dealership for far less than it was worth. I had a stack of cash in my purse. That money wasn't my freedom, it was a tiny baby's breath. When I deposited the money at the hospital cashier, Chloe was sitting next to me in a wheelchair. In her arms, finally out of the incubator and wrapped in blankets, was Leo. The woman at the counter looked at me, then at Chloe, then at the receipt in my hand. She was trying to figure out who we were, the bond between us. She couldn't understand. Sometimes even we couldn't. When we left the hospital, the air was freezing but sunny. Chloe held the baby in her arms, tightly protecting him from the wind. We got into a taxi. The destination, that yellow building in Pilsen. My home, that perfect apartment in Lincoln Park, was now a battleground for foreclosure agents and lawyers. I couldn't go back there anymore. I didn't want to. When we entered Chloe's apartment, it was stuffy. Mark's scent still lingered on the walls. We laid Leo in his crib. In that small room between those blue walls, we 2 women stood by the crib. "Grace," Chloe said, her voice trembling, "why are you doing this? You sold your car. You're homeless." "Why?" I touched the bars of the crib. "Because it's not this child's fault, Chloe. And it's not yours either. We were trapped under the same rubble. If we don't hold on to each other, we'll die under it. That night and the nights that followed were the strangest, most difficult, but most real days of my life. Chloe had trouble getting out of bed due to her postpartum stitches and the trauma she had experienced. Leo, being premature, required special attention. He had to be fed every 2 hours, burped his temperature, constantly checked. I was like a mother to a baby I had never given birth to. I would wake up at 3 in the morning to Leo's faint cry. I would get up from the couch in the living room and tiptoe to the nursery so as not to wake Chloe. When I held him, the warmth of his tiny body spread through my chest. As I prepared his bottle, the only sounds in the quiet house were the boiling of the water and Leo's impatient breaths. I would look into his eyes as I fed him. They were Mark's eyes, but they were innocent. There were no lies, no betrayal, just the will to live. I hated Mark, but I couldn't hate this baby. On the contrary, every time I touched him, the broken motherhood feeling inside me was being repaired. A week later, Chloe had recovered a bit. One evening, as I was stirring soup in the kitchen, she came up to me. She was holding a large black trash bag. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Cleaning," she said. There was a determined look in her eyes. Together, we went into the bedroom. We opened the closet. We stuffed all of Mark's clothes in that house, that blue linen shirt, those navy slippers, his books, his toothbrush, into that one black bag. With each item we threw away, it felt like a weight was being lifted off our shoulders. When we had emptied the room, Chloe sat on the floor. I sat down next to her. The black bag was between us. "He's gone," Chloe said. "The man who deceived us, who turned us against each other, is gone." "He's gone," I said. "And we're still here." Chloe rested her head on my shoulder. For the first time, the tension between us had completely disappeared. We were no longer rivals. We were like sisters, two women brought together by circumstance. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace," she whispered. "Leo and I would have been lost." "I would have been the one who was lost," I said, surprised at the confession in my own voice. "If I had stayed in that empty house with all that anger, I would have gone crazy. Leo was good for me too." The next day, we put Mark's things out on the curb. We watched from the window as the garbage truck took them away. Then we went to the market. We cleaned the house from top to bottom. We opened the curtains. We let the sun in. That house was no longer Mark's mistress's house. It was the fortress of two women and a baby. In the evenings, when Leo was asleep, we started to drink tea and talk, not just about Mark, but about our dreams, our childhoods, our fears. I learned that Chloe was an excellent cook, that she had actually studied to be a teacher, but Mark had discouraged her, saying, "You don't need to work." I, in turn, taught her about numbers, budgeting, the mathematics of survival. One morning, as I was changing Leo's diaper, Chloe was watching me. "You know," she said with a smile, "he doesn't have to call you Auntie. I think he can call you Mama Grace, too." I paused, my eyes filled with tears. I kissed Leo's tiny foot. "Auntie is good," I said, smiling, "but the strongest auntie." The world outside was still challenging. Debts, lawsuits, an uncertain future awaited us. But inside that small apartment in this new life we had built by leaning on each other, there was no fear. Leo was growing, and with him we were growing too, healing. The infamous bone-chilling Chicago wind had finally broken. The grass in the park had turned a fresh green, and the branches of the trees were budding. As I pushed Leo's stroller, the sun on my face seemed to warm my soul, which had been cold for months. Chloe was walking beside me. The pale, fearful expression on her face was gone. In its place was a woman with color in her cheeks who stood taller. She poured tea from the thermos in her hand into 2 paper cups. "Should we sit for a bit?" she asked, pointing to a bench in the shade. "Leo's asleep. Don't want to jostle him." We sat side by side on the bench. Leo was sleeping soundly in his stroller, a pacifier in his mouth. The handful of a baby from the incubator was gone, replaced by a healthy boy with chubby cheeks who smiled at everyone. Looking at him, that old familiar ache didn't visit me. I no longer asked, "Why not me?" I now said, "I'm so glad he exists." He was our shared victory. As I sipped my tea, I started watching the crowd in the park. Children running, seniors chatting, hot dog vendors. Life was flowing with all its vitality. I had emerged from the dark tunnel Mark had created and found the light again. Just then, a red plastic ball rolled quickly and hit the stroller's wheel. The stroller shook slightly, but Leo didn't wake up. "Oops," I heard a child's voice. A 5 or 6-year-old girl with curly hair was running towards us. Behind her, a slightly older boy with glasses followed. The girl stopped in front of us, out of breath. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said, clasping her hands in front of her. "It was an accident." "Did I wake the baby?" I smiled. I bent down, picked up the ball, and handed it to her. He didn't wake up, don't worry. He's a heavy sleeper. Daisy Noah, I heard an anxious male voice. I looked up. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s was walking quickly towards us. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. He had the embarrassed expression of a father used to his children's mischief. He was slightly out of breath when he reached us. "I'm so sorry, ladies," he said, placing a hand on his chest. I looked away for a second, and they lost the ball. "We've disturbed you." "Not at all," I said. "They're kids. They're supposed to run." The man's gaze shifted to the stroller. Then he turned back to me. His eyes were tired, but his gaze held a deep, warm sincerity. It was nothing like Mark's evasive, calculating look. "My name is Ethan," he said, nodding his head instead of extending a hand. "And these rascals are Daisy and Noah." "I'm Grace," I said. "This is my friend Chloe and her son Leo." Ethan gave Chloe a polite nod as well. Then he stroked Daisy's hair. "All right, you've got your ball. Now play a little more carefully. Let's not bother people, kids." "Okay, Dad," they said, running back to the grass. Ethan made a move to leave, but it was as if something was holding him back. He hesitated. "It's a beautiful day," he said, as if trying to start a casual conversation. "I love this time of year in Chicago. When the gray clouds go away, the city transforms." "Yes," I said, squinting at the sun. "It feels like everything is starting over." Ethan smiled. The smile made the crow's feet around his eyes more prominent. "Starting over. That's a nice way to put it. The kids and I come here every weekend. If they don't burn off their energy, they climb the walls at home." Chloe chimed in. "It must be hard on their mom, running after them on the weekend instead of resting." Ethan's smile faded slightly but didn't disappear. A shadow passed over his eyes. He put his hands in his pockets. "Their mother isn't with us," he said in a calm voice. "It's been 2 years. So I'm trying to be both a mom and a dad. Sometimes I fall short, but we're trying." Something inside me stung. There was a moment of silence. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "I didn't know," Chloe said apologetically. "It's all right," Ethan said kindly. "Life goes on. I have to be strong for them." He looked at me. In that moment, our eyes met. In that look, there was the silent understanding of a person who knew pain, seeing another person who knew pain. The wreckage of betrayal, I had lived through the emptiness of loss he had lived through. We were both wounded, but we were both standing. We were in the park, under the sun. "It must be hard," I said, softening my voice. "But you have beautiful children. You're clearly a very good father." Ethan's face lit up again. This time, his smile was more genuine. "Thank you, Grace. It's good to hear that." He took his phone out of his pocket. He checked the time. Lunchtime. Mine turn into little monsters when they're hungry. "If you'll excuse me." "It was nice to meet you," I said. "You too," Ethan said. He took a step back, then he stopped. "Maybe. If we see each other here again next week, I apologize in advance for the noise my kids will make." "Maybe," I said. He called his children. He took their hands and they started walking towards the park exit. I watched them go. Daisy was pulling on her father's arm. Noah was explaining something. Ethan was listening to them patiently. Chloe turned to me. She nudged me lightly with her elbow. "He couldn't take his eyes off you," she whispered with a giggle. "Don't be silly, Chloe," I said, but I could feel my cheeks getting warm. "I'm not being silly. He seems like a good man. Honest. And most importantly, there was no ring on his finger." I leaned back. I looked up at the sky. For months, even years, I had kept the doors to my heart tightly shut. To trust, to love, to believe in someone, these were dangerous words for me. But in that moment, remembering Ethan's tired but kind gaze, I heard a small click in the lock of that door. Maybe life wasn't just about pain. Maybe starting over was as close as a change of seasons. I took a deep breath. The air filling my lungs was clean. Grace was healing. And for the first time, when she looked at the future, she saw not darkness, but a possibility. When the evening silence settled over the house, Chloe and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Steaming cups of tea were in front of us. Leo was finally asleep. The sound of his steady, tiny breaths from the other room was the new, peaceful rhythm of this house. I looked out the window, at the streets of Chicago, illuminated by the orange glow of the streetlights. The woman who had collapsed in that hospital corridor months ago, whose life had been turned upside down, was gone. In her place was a Grace who didn't hide her scars but was proud of them, who stood tall. My phone screen lit up, a message from Ethan. "The kids are already looking forward to next week. I think I am too. Good night, Grace." A warm, involuntary smile spread across my face. In my heart, the hinges of that long, rusted locked door creaked and opened just a crack. Was I scared? Yes, but fear was no longer an enemy that paralyzed me. It was a companion that kept me alive, that made me take firm steps. Chloe saw the phone in my hand and the expression on my face and smiled. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "You deserve it," she said with sincerity. "You more than anyone deserve to be happy to start over." "We deserve it," I said, squeezing her hand. "Both of us." As I sipped my tea, I looked back. That day in the doctor's office, looking at that computer screen, I had felt my breath catch my world, go dark. I thought everything was over, that I would never see the light of day again. But that darkness wasn't an end. It was the harsh winter season necessary for a new seed to sprout in the soil of my life. If that betrayal hadn't happened, if I hadn't faced that painful truth, maybe I would still be trying to stand like a tree with rotten roots in that false happiness. But now I was under the clear sky after the storm. I stood up and walked to the nursery. I stood by the crib. Leo had placed his tiny hand under his cheek and was sleeping soundly. Like his name, he was our greatest hope. Mark had left us a wreck, but from the stones of that wreck, we had built ourselves an unshakable fortress. Life sometimes breaks us from the most unexpected places. It ruins our plans. It shatters the truths we believe in. We feel like we're in a pitch-black tunnel with no exit. But remember, the moment the tunnel is darkest is the moment you are closest to the light. I opened the window slightly. I breathed in the cool night air. I looked at the shining stars in the sky. If you right now have fallen at some point in your life, if your heart is broken and your hope is gone, remember my story. Pain is temporary. Broken places heal stronger, and every ending is actually the first sentence of a clean, unwritten new beginning. My story doesn't end here. In fact, Grace's story is just beginning.